Hey everyone, it is Ryan Seacrest here. Ready to heat up your summer vacation? Get ready, things are about to get sizzling at Chumba Casino. Your summer getting a whole lot hotter with a special daily login bonus waiting just for you. So sign up now for Reels of Fun and Reels of Prizes right here at Chumba Casino with yours truly. Join me at ChumbaCasino.com and dive into a summer of social casino fun.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, starting next week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane Haff NFL. And I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I've just sort of started thinking this is probably the last non-film podcast we do till what? February, maybe January, depending on how the season goes, which is
till the week
weird.
4 bye week or week 5 bye week.
Yeah, but we'll find film from the first 3 weeks. There'll be something to do. So it's probably the last non-film show for a while. Yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? We're talking off air about how strange it is that the season's actually back, but it doesn't begin on a Sunday. I'll get in there before the comments about people moaning at me for not staying up, but I'm not staying up Friday night because I have too much work as an adult and I cannot deal with no sleep at all, sadly. So a few years ago I would have stayed up, but it'll be a Saturday morning for me, which just feels so wrong. Like starting the Eagles season on a Saturday morning is about as bizarre as it gets. But except for that, I'm incredibly excited. It would just be a very strange start to the season for me. But there you go.
Yeah, Jonny, not a real fan page.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
But we are joined by a guy who is a true fan, a journalist. He's definitely going to be watching the game on Friday night. It is Brandon Lee Gowton from bleedinggreennation.com. Give him a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Brandon Gowton. Brandon, I mean, I assume you're watching the game, right?
I will indeed be watching the Eagles' first game of the season on Friday night against the Green Bay Packers in Brazil. We've known about this game for a long time now, especially longer than we would for most week ones, right? Because of the international factor and how big of a deal that always is. And clearly Eagles players and coaches are really fired up to go down to Brazil. So can't wait for this one.
Yeah, and we are going to get into that a little bit. We've got a comment here that already made me laugh, so I have to go to it. Eagles Eric on Twitter says that if Shane stood on Johnny's shoulders, they still wouldn't be taller than BLG.
That's right.
Since Jonny and I have never been in the same state at the same time, we can't confirm or deny that, but maybe one day it'll work out. So
I was going to say, is that a criticism of me or you, Shane? I'm not sure if Eric's firing shots at me or you there, but
I think it's just more of a test
because I'm British. Yeah, it could be, but probably English. We're smaller than you guys in general, so I'm going to just assume I'm smaller than Shane, even though I've never asked him how tall he is. But we'll leave it a mystery now.
What we really need is the mock draftable version of spider charts for podcasters. Yeah. And BLG would be the full spider chart.
That's right.
I would just be the little blip in the middle because, I'm slow and not tall and all that stuff. Yeah, but we didn't come here to talk about my lack of athletic ability or BLG's physical stature. We came here to talk about the Eagles season as a whole. We're going to do a season preview episode. We're going to go through a few different categories and make selections for team MVP, breakout players, disappointments, and then Johnny's absolute favorite. We're going to do a record prediction at the end. And so that should be fun. I can never get Jonny to predict a game or a record, but we're going to get it all on the record today. And so we will start off with the offensive side of the ball. We're going to go offensive MVP. And Brandon, I'll throw it to you first here. Who is your offensive MVP for the Eagles this year?
Yeah, glad I get to go first here because I'm going to go chalk and I'm going to go with the most important player on the team. I'm going to go with Britton Covey. I'm kidding. I'm going to go with Jalen Hurts. Had a fantastic training camp. I think he was not helped clearly by the coaching staff last year in a lot of regards. And I think that will be different this year. He obviously has a really good support system here. I just think the arrow's pointing up for Jalen Hurts. I feel really encouraged after watching him have a great training camp. Again, best training camp of his career. He looks faster than he ever has in training camp, as well as looking, I think, more developed as a passer as he ever has. Some of the things I've really liked in that regard are just how he's processed information. I feel like I've seen him be more comfortable going through his reads and then making a quick decision, as opposed to in years past or training camp practices where I would just be like, why is he holding on to the ball for forever and then just drifting out and either taking off running, which is like pretty useless in a practice setting a lot of the time, especially, or just throwing it out of bounds. And I just didn't see as much of that this year. I think he's leveled up, and I think he's going to have a really big year.
All right. Jalen Hurts is the official pick here from BLG. I guess we didn't establish this before, but am I allowed to also pick Jalen Hurts? Or are we going like three?
Yeah. You can pick the chalk. I've gone chalk occasionally. Depends on what order we pick, but yeah, you can double down on Hurts.
Yeah, to me it's Hurts too. I tweeted out I quote tweeted a video that Kurt put out on Twitter, just talking about the Eagles' lack of, like, you can't say that Jalen Hurts can't beat zero pressure because he was never given an option to beat zero pressure. And that's something I've said all the way back to the Super Bowl season with Steichen. I was critical of their hot answers that year. It just never was a problem, whether that was because Hurts was more healthy and thus more able to escape that pressure. Maybe defenses hadn't fully clued in on that yet. They were certainly a lot better in the RPO game that year, which negated some of that pressure as well. But it's been something I've talked about for a couple of years. This is the first time that we're going to see Jalen Hurts with a system that fully builds that in. And that's going to put a lot of responsibilities on Jalen Hurts. And as long as he's able to process all that and able to get through, it's going to be a radically different offense in terms of what he's asked to do. If he fully gets the mental aspect of that, I have no doubt about the physical tools, and I think he could be primed for the best season of his career. So I will also take Jalen Hurts, as chalk as that may be. Jonny, what about you?
Yeah, if I've sort of written down names in case I went last, so thanks for picking the most obvious one as well. It's clearly Jalen Hurts. But I did write down a couple of names just in case you both went with the same one. This is one of them where I did write down two, and I think I'm going to go a little bit random, but I wrote down Saquon Barkley, and I'm sort of basing that just on the fact that I feel like everyone else would sort of say AJ Brown or maybe in Devontae Smith. There's a huge amount of hype, and I feel like the Eagles have historically always been a running back by committee, and I think we know that that's what the sort of team believes in. But I also think the team believe in sort of market inefficiencies, and I think running back has gone so downhill of late. I sort of get the feeling they might just run Barkley into the ground over 2 years, and not in like a horrible way, in like a strategic way, not like sign him just to ruin his legs. But I think if he stays healthy, like I've got the feeling his running game is going to be exceptionally good. I think you can make an argument that in pass protection, it's a worse offensive line than they've had in recent years, because I have not seen Becton at right guard in pass protection, and I think Cam Jurgens may struggle a little in pass protection. And I think even Jordan Mailata, as good as he is, can be susceptible to really good pass rushers. But when you look at them as run blockers, they are extremely good, like sort of ridiculously good. If Mekhi Becton can be what we hope he can be as a right guard, I think his run blocking is going to be out of this world. I think Cam Jurgens can do stuff in space that Kelsey could. And I think, obviously, Dickerson, Johnson, and Mailata are unbelievably good run blockers. And I think the Eagles are going to run him a lot. I might be wrong, and fantasy guys I know are sort of unsure about him. I know some have him as like top 4 running back this year. Some have him more in that tier 2 because they think Gainwell might still carries and Hurts will score touchdowns. And Hurts was going to run in touchdowns in the goal line, I think, with the tush push, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the Eagles are going to have a really, really interesting run game this year. I think it's going to be a different run game. I think they might catch teams by surprise a little bit early on. A lot of counter, a lot of power. And I have a feeling that Barkley may just have one of those like ridiculous years that running backs can have. Is he going to be picked as MVP? No. But I'll make a case for Barkley where I think some people are still maybe overhyping the running back by committee. I think that's maybe what the Eagles used to do, but I don't think they're going to pay a running back top dollar money and not use him a lot. So I expect Barkley to do really well this year. So I'll give you a little bit of a random one there and go with Saquon.
All right. I like it. And I could certainly, it's so hard for me because I thought about saying AJ Brown too. There's so many weapons on this offense. It's so hard. You know, we're going to do a bold prediction later. And I really wanted to be like Jalen Hurts is going to be a 4,000 yard passer. But again, I'm like, man, the run game is going to be so good. Like there's multiple good receiving targets. It's so hard to like predict one person to have just this statistically absurd year because there's so many mouths to feed in the offense. But that should, certainly make it fun to watch and really hard to stop. So let's flip over to defensive MVP. And Jonny, since you moaned about going last on offensive MVP, I'll kick it to you first here. Who do you have for the Eagles defensive MVP?
Oh, this is perfect because this was the only one I wrote down one name, and BLG knows what I'm going to say. I basically didn't write down a single other player other than Jalen Carter. So I don't have an option 2. Like, it's quite weird actually, because I was trying to think of an option 2, and you guys might have one, but it feels to me like he's head and shoulders already the Eagles' best player. And I think there's basically question marks on every single other player on defense except Jalen Carter. And I know that's weird to say of a second-year pro, but I'm not sure there's anyone that I can confidently say is basically going to have an extremely good year on defense except Jalen Carter. I really do think there's question marks about every single other player. And I think Carter's question marks are more maybe conditioning off the field. And even off the field is more of a pre-draft thing. We've never heard any bad noise of him sort of in season. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I'm going to keep it nice and easy. I think Jalen Carter will quite sort of easily be defensive MVP. And I don't have a backup for that one. So I'm glad you started with me as well, Shane.
All right. I kind of suspected this one would be a crowded room on the Jalen Carter bandwagon, but BLG, Jalen Carter, or did you go somewhere else here?
Yeah, impossible not to pick Jalen Carter, but I was thinking like of Johnny's question here, like who would, I think this is also kind of telling, like who would be that second person? Maybe you can make a case for CJ GJ just because of
that's what I'd have done as well. Yeah.
Of like both, I think personality, but also just the big play ability, I think it's going to be hard for him, to have the kind of season he had when he was here in 2022. But if you're looking, for a playmaker who could just have that kind of impact in addition to go with the swagger, and I think there would be some highs and lows, but maybe just the highs standing out and could challenge Jalen Carter for that, or at least not really, but come close. But yeah, I mean, Carter had, I think a great summer. And as Jonny has said, I don't think it's not, and notice he's not putting in this as a bold prediction. I don't even think it's a bold prediction to be like Jalen Carter could be, first team all pro this year, especially with Aaron Donald gone. I think he could really take over that mantle as soon as this season.
Yeah. So on Chalk Talk, when Mark and I did our awards draft, I selected Jalen Carter as one of my defensive player of the year options. He's plus 5,000 right now. I think that's a good bet if you're a betting person out there, because you look at how good he was early last season. And yes, he fell off at the end of the year. The entire defense was a disaster under Matt Patricia. You get a little bit of that rookie wall as well. That's well documented. I expect Carter to bounce back. And the concern might be that, if you're an offensive coordinator, you want 4 hands on Jalen Carter every play. You're going to double team, you're going to slide to him, double team him every snap. Well, Fangio doesn't just line up his guys and rush. This isn't a Jim Schwartz. This isn't a Jonathan Gannon. He likes to blitz. He likes to, blitz a linebacker, drop out an edge like we talked about. And that makes it really hard to consist. If you are so predictable in double teaming Jalen Carter, I can promise you that Devin White is going to have free runs at the quarterback. And so you can't be that predictable with how you call your protections. So I think Jalen Carter is primed for a huge season. He's going to be my pick. As Jonny was talking, I was trying to think, who else would I pick? And I settled on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson being the other guy. I could see, CJ GJ having a great year. He's going to play in the slot. He's going to play in the box. He's going to play at safety. We saw the ball production he had 2 years ago, which Jonny and I kind of said at the time was not necessarily a result of him making good defensive plays, but he was making some great catches when the ball did come his way. Ultimately, if you're going to be a defensive back and be an MVP, it's tied to a lot of interceptions, and that's real fluky. But I think constantly disrupting the line of scrimmage is something we can expect and we'll see more readily. So I'll make the clean sweep here with Jalen Carter. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Chauncey Gardner-Johnson have a great year as well. So let's move on to offensive breakout player. BLG, who is your breakout candidate on the offense this year?
Yeah, kind of a tough one, just from a standpoint of a lot of guys are so established here, as we've talked about. And I don't think I can pick Cam Jurgens. even if he has a good season, like, are really going to be like, oh, he was a breakout? It's like, it's hard to kind of like call your center the breakout player. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm actually going to go with Devontae Smith here because I think Devontae had a great camp, and we already know he's a great player. Like, so it's not like breaking out into being that, but I think I'm looking at specifically how the Eagles are going to use him, and I think we're going to see him in the slot a lot more than we've ever seen. And I think right now, and I think Jonny kind of touched on this really well in the Jahan Dotson breakdown on Bleeding Green Nation, where I think there seems to be kind of a perception that like Dotson just is the slot guy because he's the third receiver. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think we will see Dotson in the slot sometimes. Of course, I think we'll see almost everyone in the slot at some point, but I think majority of that is actually going to be Devontae, and I think that's going to be able to get him some easier matchups. Not that it's a one-for-one situation, but we saw how CeeDee Lamb really has benefited from working inside in the slot, and obviously we know Justin Jefferson can do some damage in there as well. So I think Devontae is going to get some more favorable matchups than he's seen before. Early in camp, Avonte Maddox was talking about how he saw Devontae Smith in the slot a lot more than he ever has in his career. So I think there's something real to Devontae operating in the slot, and he's just so good. And again, not like taking this leap to, we already know he's a great player, but I think maybe even hitting a new level, or at least just like a new utilization, and that maybe kind of changes some things for the offensive equation as a whole.
All right, Devontae Smith, I love that pick. Jonny, where are you leaning for offensive breakout player of the year?
Yeah, Devontae Smith is a great shout. I didn't know if he was already good enough. And I guess your argument, BLG, will be he's going to go sort of next level, maybe that top 10 receiver around the league. I'm going to go very random. I'm going to go Mekhi Becton. Very hard to pick an Eagles guard, and I'm doing this purely on the basis that, and BLG probably knows more than me, he does know more than me because he watched training camp in the person. But I am pretty sure that this didn't really feel like a competition to me. From reading it from the outside, it seemed like they were giving Becton this job, and the way they used him in preseason was basically like he'd won the job already. And I have a feeling that they were almost just playing him to get him some reps rather than actually giving him a fair shot at the competition. And I think if you compare what they said about Tyler Steen, sort of when we've heard them in the past, it seemed to me like he was going to be the guaranteed starter. When I did my Tyler Steen breakdown at that point, it was quite funny because I'd written the whole article and I'd basically concluded, well, he should start unless something goes horribly wrong. And then you tweeted, I think it was you who tweeted the Brian Baldinger quote saying, well, Becton's going to start if he's healthy. And then I actually added it to the end of my article on Tyler Steen saying, however, little spanner in the works. When Baldy says something on the offensive line, I normally listen very carefully. So I trust everything Stoutland does from an offensive line basically perspective. And I think Mekhi Becton's a good example of a breakout because he's basically been not very good. And I think he's playing next to an elite right tackle. And if he can just hold up in pass protection, I think he's going to be one of those guys going to have those weird like highlight reel blocks in the run game where he just pancakes like a lighter defensive tackle and it goes like viral. So I'm going to go with Mekhi Becton purely on the basis that I think I trust the Eagles hugely. And just quickly, BLG, do you agree that it was like a little bit of a not competition, or am I being harsh there? Do you think early on in training camp when you were watching it, did Becton just run away with it, or do you think the coaches always wanted him to win it, really?
They clearly, like going back to OTAs, they were like looking for opportunities because at first it was Lane Johnson who didn't show up to OTAs, so Becton was at right tackle, and then Dickerson missed minicamp due to some reason, so then Becton was in at left guard. So they were clearly like, looking for spots for him to get in when they could. I think, if Steen hadn't gotten hurt, there's a chance that he wouldn't have lost that job, but that's the thing, we'll never know because he did get hurt.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I forget that Steen got hurt as well. It just seemed like towards the end, it was like a really big done deal, which surprised me personally. So yeah, I'll go Becton, Shane.
All right. I am with BLG on this one. I went with Devontae Smith, and I thought about Cam Jurgens just sliding into his natural position. I didn't ultimately end up going that direction, but I just think, if you look at last season, Devontae Smith had more yards per target than A.J. Brown. 9.5 to 9.3. He just didn't have the volume that A.J. Brown had. And that makes sense when your offense is, hey, A.J. Brown, run fast and far. Hey, Jalen, just chuck it up. And that doesn't play to Devontae Smith's strengths. Although we've seen Devontae Smith be a really good contested catch guy downfield, which is baffling at his size. But coming out of the draft, one of the things I talked about with Devontae Smith, his best skill was his route running, and his ability to get off press coverage. Now, getting off of press coverage isn't something you have to do in the slot because you're off the line of scrimmage. However, when you give that guy a two-way go, he can break inside, he can break outside, he can sit down. You can use him and his football IQ to be the guy that is making these side adjusts on, free blitzers and things. I think that Kellen Moore is going to use him so much to help beat the blitz. I think he's going to scheme up things for him. And I think we're fine. Not that Devontae Smith hasn't been fantastic. Like, it feels silly to pick a breakout candidate that through 3 seasons is averaging over 1,000 yards a year.
Right.
But I think he's going to be so much more impactful this year because I think the offense is going to play into his strengths instead of asking him to do something that should be outside of his skill set, and yet he's such a good player it wasn't in the contested catches. So I think you see his production come up this year, maybe at a little bit of expense of A.J. Brown's production. Obviously not because Brown's not still going to be great. I just think that Devontae Smith is not mentioned as like a potential top 10 wide receiver, and I think he is, and I think he would be if A.J. Brown wasn't there. And I think by the end of the season, people will start to see him more that way. So I'll go Devontae Smith.
Shane, can I just add as well? It's a bit of a weird take, but when I was going to pick Devontae Smith, I did look this up. I'm pretty sure he's barely ever been injured with the Eagles, so he's basically played in every single game. I think his rookie season, he maybe missed one. But anyway, when you look at his ESPN numbers, he has started 17 games.
He missed one last year, week 18.
Was it one last year? Perfect. And what that sort of tells you is when you actually look at, yes, you are correct, he played 16 last year. When you actually look at his numbers, although you can say he's a 1,000-yard receiver, when you consider he played every single game on a per game basis, that's not like elite. Like, his numbers are good, but they're not like off the charts good. I think sometimes 1,000-yard seasons can look better. Whereas if you were to say in 2022, for example, when his best year, 1,196 yards in 17 games, is only actually 70 yards a game. So sometimes I think he may not, because the odds are players get hurt, but I think if you're going to pick him as a breakout, you could argue that number will go up. I think he can easily eclipse 70 yards a game. And I think sometimes when you look at totals, you're right. Because in a weird way, it doesn't feel like Devontae Smith has put up extremely good numbers. And I think that's because he's been sort of fortunate in some ways, but he's played pretty much every single game. And if he had missed 2 or 3, all of a sudden he's got 900 yards a season. And all of a sudden he's less spoken about. So I think that's another shout for him being a breakout player, is looking at what he does on a per game basis. I wanted to throw it out there because I was going to mention it if I picked him, but I changed my mind and went for Becton instead.
Yeah, he played 82% of the snaps as a rookie, and then 92% and 91% of the snaps each of the last 2 years. And I'm a guy who was really concerned about his size and his durability moving to the NFL level when he came out. So I'm really happy to have been wrong about that. I'm also really happy I didn't let that sway me on Bryce Young, but that's a whole different thing. So let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Same question here. We're going breakout player of the year. Jonny, I'll throw it to you first this time. Who's the breakout guy on the Eagles defense?
I'm actually going to do a really bad podcast thing and just bring it back to you, Shane, because you haven't started one at all yet. And I've got a few for this. So I feel like I'm going to take my chances and not go first. And you haven't started any. So at the moment, you're just picking what we've picked. So I'm going to put the pressure on you.
Yeah, this is the one I want to start the least because
that's why I wanted to throw it to you.
There's so many different guys that you could call out. So I was actually going to see where it went for you guys. I will go with give me
stress.
A lot of pressure here.
Yeah, there's so many. I really want to pick Keely Ringo. I just don't know that he's going to get on the field enough. If he had won that starting job, and I think he should have. Granted, I've only seen preseason, but I'm going to pick him anyways. He's going to get on. Okay. I think he'll get on the field enough. Injuries are bound to happen. He's going to get into that rotation. I was so impressed with what I saw from Keely Ringo in the preseason. It lined up with what I saw from him last year when he finally got into the games near the end of the season. I thought he was a good prospect. I've said it on this show before. I understood why he fell out of the first round. Him falling to day 3 is absurd. There's no reason that should have ever happened. I think he's got tremendous speed. He's got tremendous athleticism. There's some stiffness in his hips and things, but we walked through a play on, I think it was the week 2 preseason recap where he got beat and he makes it up with the speed and is able to impact the catch point. I think he's going to be used a lot as that solo receiver defender against trips to press and run with a guy to allow the safety to cheat over to the trip side. And if he can master that role, If he's able to take that away, he's going to be super impactful for this defense. So give me Keely Ringo.
Now you go, Jonny. One of us. All right, I was going to say also that's a rubbish one for you to go first because you definitely could have got Ringo at third because there's no way we got BLG are taking a backup corner. But anyway, I will go, and this is one that I could have gone lots of different ways. People probably expect me to go Jomo, but I'm going to go with a different defensive tackle. I'm going to go Milton Williams. I think Milton Williams is already a very good player, but I don't think maybe around the league he's seen as a very good player. I think the best thing all off season I heard was that Vic Fangio said that he wanted to trade for him last year. And I know coaches say things, but I would assume that's true. And assuming that is true, then BLG nodding his head.
Yeah, Fangio just doesn't say stuff. He's very honest.
Yeah, fair point. And that is a really, really good sign because, I'm not really sure why he thought the Eagles would trade him, number one, except for maybe coming up to a contract year. But I assume, I'm maybe Fangio's the kind of guy that does just tell his GM, that plan looks good, with no understanding of whether they can actually get him or not. Just maybe he just throws it out there.
That Patrick Mahomes guy, I wanted to trade for him.
That tells me that he really likes him. And I think, firstly, I think he's already really good. But his numbers haven't really reflected that. I know it's not all about sacks, but I think he only had about half a sack last year.
Yeah.
I could easily see him hitting 4 or 5 sacks, and maybe that's enough just to take him to another level because in run defense, he's really, really good already. And who knows, maybe we see more 4-down fronts. Maybe we see less Jordan Davis if things aren't going well this year, or maybe we do see a lot more sort of Carter, Milton Williams and Ajomo as free techniques if things don't go to plan with Jordan Davis. And I think even if Jordan Davis plays well, then that means they're playing 5-man fronts, and that means you've got a good chance of Jordan Davis with Carter and Milton Williams either side of him. And if that's the case, he's going to get one-on-one matchups all day long because there's no offensive coordinator that is ever sliding the line his way. So I think he's in a sort of perfect position to take advantage of some favorable matchups. So I will throw out Milton Williams as someone who I already think is very good, but maybe will take another step forward as my breakout player. What about you, BLG?
I'm with you, Jonny. Milton Williams was the guy I was going to take. He had a really good training camp, I thought. There would just be plays where you weren't even really focusing in on him at all and say, oh, there's Milton Williams again, making a play in the backfield, whether it's kind of stopping the run again, or TFL in quotes for practice, or getting to the quarterback sack in quotes for practice. But certainly was disruptive. And we're going to see a lot of 5-man fronts. The Eagles are actually listing on their team issued depth chart the 5-man front as their base defense. And, I also don't know for sure if we're going to see as much of a defensive tackle rotation as we've seen in years past. I think we are at some level. It's not going to literally just be the 3 guys starting out there at all times, but just going off of Fangio's history, I think he tends to kind of like to play the starters a little bit more than the Eagles as an organization. I think to kind of rotate that a little bit more. So I think there will be plenty of snaps for Milton Williams to get these chances. And the perception thing is really going in his favor because even if he has 5 sacks, to go from half sack last year to 5 is that's going to be considered a breakout for him. And he's in a contract year. There's all the reason in the world for him to, be motivated and make sure he gets his payday, whether that's here or elsewhere. I just think things are in place for Milton Williams to really click here and hit a new level. And I think even though his sack total was a half last year, I've heard Fran Duffy, and I think others too, talk about how his pressure, rates were way better, than the sack number indicated. So it just feels like he's just tailor-made to take a next step.
All right. So a lot of love here for Milton Williams. I should have guessed that's where Jonny was going to go. I should have sniped it from him. But if I was going to try to do that, I definitely would have guessed Moro Ajomo. So I would have guessed the wrong defensive tackle.
Yeah, okay. That is good to hear, though. Can I just give you one other name, Shane? Not that we're doing this, but just because I have him written down. I'm just going to throw him out there with no explanation at all. If BLG had gone before me, I would have gone with Reed Blankenship, who I think is heavily underrated on this defense. But that's all I'm going to say. The people can wait till we talk about Blankenship in the season. But he would have been my other pick that I had down.
I believe at one point Jonny said he was the next Buda Baker or something like that. So
that might have been about Sidney Brown, actually.
You're right. Yeah. That was Sidney Brown.
Oh, okay.
You're going to make fun of. You're going to try and take me out of context. At least get me correct, Shane. At least get the quote right.
Okay, well, let's turn the page now. We've been real positive. Now we're going to take the other side of the coin here. We're going to talk about a guy on each side of the ball that we think could be the biggest disappointment. And so BLG, I'll throw it to you first. Let's go offense here. Who do you think is potentially poised to be a disappointment on the offense?
I'm going to go Becton. I'm going to go against Johnny's breakout player and go Becton just because, like, and I kind of was saving this for this answer. I didn't answer it in the previous question. I don't think he didn't run away with that job. Like, he was so good that he simply had to be the starting right guard. Whereas, by contrast, Jordan Mailata in 2021, when he was quote unquote competing with Andre Dillard, I mean, like, Mailata looked good, and also Dillard looked like a disaster. It was a no-brainer that Mailata should have been the left tackle, and clearly has gone on to be a really good left tackle. And meanwhile, Andre Dillard, not quite that in the NFL. I think, is Dillard on the Packers now? I think he might be. I forget where he went. Anyway, you can look that up. But yeah, I think Becton, there's some really good things, especially as a run blocker, that I'm intrigued by, encouraged by. He's so massive. But there were some things in pass protection at times that kind of made me like a little like, I don't know about this. And there were just some practices there too, where I don't know if it was always just his fault, but there was interior pressure being allowed. And obviously that could be on Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson too. They're all factors in there. But I just think between those things, and also just from a standpoint of Becton's had a really tough time staying healthy. Like throughout his career. Last season was really, his first healthy season. So I think even if he is playing well, there's injury risk here just based on his history. So I just think, again, the interpretation of this question to me is like, I think expectations are a little bit higher than they should be for him, just because it's like, I think the perception is, oh, he like stepped up and he ran away with this job and he's going to be great, as much as it kind of was like, well, he did some good things, but also I think him winning the job was also about Tyler Steen falling off and getting hurt and not being able to establish himself there. So I'm not saying that he only won it by default, but he won it by like default a little bit. So I'm just, and I think there's a question mark there still. So I'm going to go with Becton.
I swear that's what I had written down before BLG talked, but Mekhi Becton is also my guy that I had written down. You look at Becton. I mean, we know how hesitant teams are to give up on first round draft picks. And the Jets drafted Mekhi Becton very highly. In 2021 and 2022 combined, he played in one game. They declined his fifth-year option. He ends up walking from the team after 4 seasons into free agency, where he didn't sign a big contract with the Eagles. It was under $3 million. And the Jets let him go. And then they went out and they signed Tyron Smith. They signed Morgan Moses, and they spent their first-round draft pick on an offensive tackle. This is a team that knew they needed offensive tackle help, and they let Becton just walk. And part of it's been he just hasn't panned out. Part of it's been his injuries that we mentioned. But part of it is he was bad last year. And now I know sacks are not just an offensive line stat, and the Jets had horrendous quarterback play last year. But per PFF charting, Mekhi Becton was assessed 12 sacks and 50 pressures allowed last season. And he also committed 18 penalties. So,
oh my gosh, 18
penalties. So
more than one a game.
More than one a game. So this is a guy who has struggled to stay healthy, has only played left tackle except for like a 2-game stretch last year at right tackle. So he's being asked to switch positions, stay healthy, and stop committing penalties. I know Jeff Stoutland is really good. I have some concerns with Mekhi Becton. And so I think he's a guy that could be primed to disappoint. I think, especially given the expectations, I think people see Jordan Mailata, what Jeff Stoutland did with him, and they're just like, Jeff Stoutland can make anybody work. They're immediately going to become an all-pro. And I don't know about that. So I'll take Mekhi Becton as the potential disappointment. It's also why I didn't react much when Jonny said that was his breakout player, because I didn't want to tip my hand. But Jonny, thoughts on that? And then you can also give us your disappointing candidate.
It's fine. I just spent 5 minutes being abused from two other people on the podcast. I just like the way Shane said, people think. It's like, just at me. I've said it about 10 minutes ago. No one's going to believe this, but I actually didn't have Becton as my first breakout player, and now I'm massively regretting going with him. I had him as second, and I had first as Jurgens, and I wanted to go with Cam Jurgens, but I always talk about Cam Jurgens. I was like, I go Becton. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, it hurts too that BLG opens his with like,
Yeah.
You can't say Cam Jurgens. So
Yeah, that didn't. I think maybe that didn't help. And then secondly, you just throw out he had 18 penalties last year. So if I could just change that in like the post, just try and get me like in post production saying another name and somehow make it work. 18 penalties. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Right. Biggest disappointment me for picking Becton as breakout player of the year. But, no, in all seriousness, I have two that I'm really struggling with. I'm gonna go with the player that I like, but I think I'm gonna go with Jahan Dotson. Just purely because I feel like the Eagles traded him because they badly needed like competency at wide receiver 3. And I think long term he might have a better role like in the future, but he's just joined the team. I don't think they're going to completely go away from giving Covey or Johnny Wilson any snaps at all. I think the offense is going to run through Goddard, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley. I think if they stay healthy, I just don't really see the way there's enough targets to go around to actually make Dotson a real like producer. And let's be honest, the way that people look at receivers is they look at fantasy points, they're going to look at yards and touchdowns. And I could easily see him like scoring like 0-1, maybe 2 touchdowns at best. And I could easily see him having significantly less than like 700 yards or something. And I think that will just not, people will say they traded the 3rd round pick for him, but I think what he'll do for the offense could be really valuable. But I think from like a numbers point of view, I think maybe people are predicting too much just simply because I don't think the Eagles have the targets to go around. As I mentioned earlier on, I think they're going to run the ball a lot as well. And I also think they're going to be quite good, which means they could be running a lot in the second half as well. And I just don't really foresee a situation where he can really excel. So I will go with Jahan Dotson. Nothing personal against him. I just can't see him putting up numbers that maybe people think he will.
That's so interesting to me because, Jonny, I felt more encouraged about Dotson after reading your breakdown. I thought it was pretty good, but I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I'm surprised you brought it up because I kind of think I've felt a little bit more negative relative to the consensus on the Dotson trade. I think it was a worthwhile move making. I just don't know that it was like, oh, Howie season, steal, no brainer, like totally robbed the Commanders. That's some of the reaction I saw. Like, I'm just a little skeptical of like, okay, why are the Commanders, who have a young quarterback and need wide receiver help, clearly do not have anyone established outside of Terry McLaurin, like, why are they giving up on this guy? Like, that makes me a little bit like, what's going on here? And I think for the Eagles, he certainly can be viewed as successful because the bar is lower than it would be in Washington because you just have to be the 3rd receiver and have to be basically like kind of more like competent. You have to be better than Quez Watkins. That's not really a high bar in theory. Like you should be able to clear that bar. But I think that's a good point by you. And I think his usefulness might not be best measured in like, these gaudy volume stats. So I think that's a good call out.
Yeah, you have to know, BOG, that you always have to plant your flag in both ends as well. So if things go well, I'll just say how much I liked him pre-draft. Right. And if things don't go well, I'll just quote this podcast. So I've covered all bases. No, it's weird because I really, really like Dotson as a player. Like, I mean, pre-draft, I liked him too much. Like, I clearly got that wrong. But I also think I was quite fair in why I said he wasn't a number 1. So it was a weird one. I really liked him, yet even though I really liked him, I made it very clear that he will never be a number 1 and his size was a big problem. There's a tiny part of me that still doesn't really see him as a great fit for Kellen Moore's offense as well. Like, I think Kellen Moore would love a wide receiver 3s, do a lot of like the jet sweep stuff, yards after the catch stuff. And the thing I struggle with is that he just never did it last year. Like, honestly, I mean, I had to watch 3 or 4 of Washington games from last year that was quite painful at times. And every single time there was something short, I was like, oh, is that? No, it's not. It's Curtis Samuel. Oh, no, it's Curtis Samuel. It was just repeatedly Curtis Samuel. So is it a case of that Jahan Dotson can't do that role? Or is it just a case, because Curtis Samuel was actually quite efficient at that role. He just can't do anything else. So it made me wonder, like, I'm not really sure if it's a negative or not on Dotson. It could just be that he wasn't as good as Curtis Samuel at doing that one very specific thing. And actually, if the Eagles see him as like a proper wide receiver 3 and they give him like screen passes, bubble screens, they give him like jet sweeps, then I think he could actually put up decent numbers. But I can't help but feel like Johnny Wilson's still going to get some snaps in run blocking. And I maybe think Covey will get more touches of that role as well. And maybe even someone like Shipley and Gainwell as well. So it's just a weird one where like I really like the player. I just don't see the numbers this year. But I do really, really like him. There's just that sort of thing in the back of my mind that I'm thinking, can he really have a successful season numbers wise, considering the amount of talent the Eagles have got? But there we go. We've probably spent enough time on Dotson.
Well, one last thing, just quickly. Yeah. I think it's also fair, and sorry, Shane, but I think it's also fair to wonder, like, Jalen Hurts, I think such a big part of his game when it comes to his receivers is like trusting them. Like that sounds obvious, and I think it's important for any quarterback. But I think especially with him, there were times last year where you guys saw it, especially on film, where he would literally not throw to wide open players. And like I think that's and obviously I think Dotson's better than that. But my question here is they just got Dotson. Like he has not had a lot of time to practice with Jalen Hurts. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how much Hurts trusts him.
Yeah, it's funny. You guys mentioned Jahan Dotson. Actually, first of all, you mentioned he's just got to be better than Quez Watkins. Quez Watkins, signed with the Steelers. Notably, the Steelers, if there is one position they get, it's wide receiver. And he's on their practice squad. He didn't even make their roster. And this is after they had a deal worked out with Brandon Ayuk and then didn't get him. Desperately needed receiver, and they got Quez Watkins. They're like, yeah, you can go to the practice squad. So that's a low bar. I remotely considered Jahan Dotson for my offensive breakout player of the year because I think he's going to be better. Fresh start. The focus isn't on him, but at the end of the day, I was like, for the reasons you guys talked about, it's like, I can't pick a wide receiver on a team with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley to be a breakout candidate. I just can't do it because he's not going to get the volume stats. So just my little tidbit on Jahan Dotson. I'm excited. I could definitely see fans being disappointed with the ultimate outcome, although I think he'll still be a solid player. But let's flip over to the defensive side and let's ask the same question. Who is the potential biggest disappointment on the defensive side of the ball? And I'm going to go first here so Jonny can't say that I'm stealing answers because I have a suspicion since nobody said this person for the breakout candidate, he is going to pop up as the disappointment. I'm going to go with Bryce Huff. I think that you bring in a guy who last season played a career high snap total, which was still only 481 snaps. He had career highs in pressures, career highs in sacks, but he's a remarkably light player. There's questions how he's going to hold up against the run because he just wasn't asked to play against the run much last year, only 132 run defense snaps. I think expectations are sky high. I think when Eagles fans think of Bryce Huff, they think this is the guy brought in to replace Hassan Reddick. And when they think of Hassan Reddick, they don't think of the Hassan Reddick of last year. They think of the Hassan Reddick that had 17 sacks in the Super Bowl season. And so I think Eagles fans connect those dots, and Bryce Huff, it's like he's going to have 15 sacks this year. And I just don't know that he's going to be able to do that over that volume. Like, honestly, if he comes out and has 10 sacks this year, I think that's a good year. I also think Eagles fans would be disappointed with that year. So I think Huff is just primed to be like a disappointment candidate for the Eagles. And if that happens, it's going to be very visible because there is a lot of questions about the depth at edge rusher. So if this team struggles to get to the quarterback, I think a lot of it is going to be pinned on Bryce Huff, rightly or wrongly. BLG, am I right? Am I wrong? Did I steal your guy? What are your thoughts?
No, and I want Jonny to go next. But just to comment on Huff, because I think Jonny and I are gonna. I think there's two players that Johnny's between, and I'll just take the opposite one. The other one he doesn't. But with Huff, I think he, had a slower start to camp. Again, part of that was you're going up against Lane Johnson. I think part of that is also that, like I was thinking about and saying here, that Hassan Reddick never necessarily totally lit it up in practice. So I wasn't really super worried about that, but he did finish camp strong. I thought kind of came on with that Patriots joint training camp practices and then the preseason game which he played in as well. I do agree that expecting Reddick production is that's a lot, and I think the biggest thing with him is just he's a projection. And Johnny's talked about that, and you guys have talked about in your breakdowns. He's not a sure thing, and that is such a juxtaposition of Hassan Reddick, who is very much a sure thing, and is just such a proven commodity. Unfortunately, the Jets don't seem to realize that, and he's still holding out. But that's tough. Yeah, I think it's fair. I did consider him for breakout behind Jalen Carter because I do think there's kind of I guess boom or bust potential here. I think there's a path where he doesn't look ready for this role, but there could be one where he totally just the projection of him being this part-time player, pass rusher who is to this bigger sample size. I think that's also possible.
Yeah, there was a small part of me that considered him as a breakout candidate as well. It could go either way. I don't think he's going to have a season that everybody's like, yep, that's what we expected. He's going to break out or be a disappointment. And he he fit better for my award categories as a disappointment. So Jonny BLG says you're up next. Who is your disappointment candidate on the defense?
Yeah, I think you got that wrong, Shane. I have Huff. He was I said I had many breakout. I had him as my third breakout as well, behind Blankenship. So, I think that's a tough disappointment. I don't think people are expecting that much. That's the thing. I don't really see that much stuff around him online. But anyway, I might be wrong. I'm maybe not in tune with Eagles Twitter as much as I used to be as well, or as I am when the season kicks off anyway. Now I'm really intrigued because BLG said he's going to take one of the other guy that I have, and I have two, and I think one's really obvious, but I don't think the second one is. So I'm sort of, and the thing is, I know BLG reads everything I write because he has to, because it's for his own website, so he knows me very well. So I'm going to guess he thinks I'm going Nolan Smith or Devin White. Is that true?
One of those two, yeah, is
right. So, okay, no, I don't know who the second one is. You're going to tell me after who the second one is. I'm just going to take the obvious layup. I don't even want to do Nolan Smith. Why didn't you take Nolan Smith, Shane? Why have you left me to become the Nolan guy? Why are you taking Bryce Huff over Nolan Smith?
Because at this point, if Nolan Smith plays 100 snaps and has no sacks, I'm not even sure that I consider that a disappointment. It's about what I expect.
Yeah, that's where I am as well. I don't really. It's hard to call it. I think the stock is so low. I think I might be now a Nolan Smith fan compared to the consensus, which is bizarre. Some of the stuff I see online, people just think he's utterly hopeless, and I'm like, no, he just hasn't got a pass rush move, but he's going to be fine as a run defender. Do you know what? Oh, I don't even want to pick any of these players. I hated this category. I really this was the one I really didn't like because I know who BLG is going to go for. I figured it out now. I think I know anyway. I'll take the one that no one thinks I'm going to say, just because it gives me a chance, and I don't really believe this. But I'm going to go.
That's a great way to start an answer, by the way.
Yeah. Well, no. All right. Let's put it this way. I think the other two players of the position are going to be very successful, and if they play a lot, he just simply won't get a chance. So I'm going to go with Sidney Brown. Sorry, wow. Shane. And it's nothing to do with Sidney Brown, literally nothing to do with him. I just think he's coming off a serious injury. He's going to miss the first 4 weeks at least. Am I right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So he's going to miss the first 4 games, and then they have a bye in week 5, so he'll probably be back for week 6.
So he's going to miss a quarter of the season already. And I think Blankenship and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson are really good, and I think they're going to play a lot of snaps. And I think by that point, who knows? Maybe Cooper DeJean has worked in a safety-free role. Maybe Avonte Maddox has shown he could be the next safety up. So I'm just thinking I think Sidney Brown might play a specialist role where he does a very specific thing against certain teams on third down, or I just can't see a situation where he starts unless there's a really bad injury crisis at safety. So it's nothing against Sidney Brown. I think if he was healthy, I wouldn't say this, and it's not a net sort of knock on him. I just think the Eagles have got a lot of good secondary players, and if Cooper DeJean can get up to speed, if Avonte Maddox can stay as good as he looked in preseason, he just might not get on the field very much. So I will go with Sidney Brown. And the answer is Nolan Smith here, but I'm not going with him because I think the stock is so low, as Shane said, that I don't even know what a disappointment season is. I feel Nolan Smith could play 10 snaps and people would be impressed at this point because people have been talking about him being inactive. So I'll go with Sidney Brown. Now I'm really intrigued, BLG. I'm guessing you knew I was going to go Nolan Smith.
I almost picked Avonte Maddox for my defensive breakout player. So
interesting.
But I was I don't know if he's going to play enough as a third safety, but I'm really intrigued by him at safety. So I can see Brown not playing much as well. But BLG, who do you have for your disappointment?
Yeah, I was between Nolan Smith and who I know you guys are saying who's really rating him right now. Hard to say he's overrated if no one's really rating him, and might actually be underrated if everyone's hating him, like Jonny said. But I mean, just from the standpoint of he was a first round pick last year, that's pretty disappointing if he doesn't have a significant role, which is what is his role on this team when he's out there playing in the final preseason game with a minute left in the second quarter. That's not good, especially when you see how this team handles key players. They don't see the field. The offense didn't see the field at all, other than Becton, and the defense saw a little bit of time, but certainly did not at all in that final preseason game. So that's concerning. But I was also between him and his fellow Georgia Bulldog teammate Jordan Davis.
That's when I realized that's who you were going to think. Yeah,
I mean, I've been a Jordan Davis guy, and I think it's just hard to. I don't really know how to feel about him right now because I don't really think there is a great gauge on where he's at right now. Because that's not really the question about him, if he starts the season good, okay, we saw that last year. So the question really, we're going to find out, like week 8 or whatever, like throughout the season, if he can hold up. And it's not like he needs to become Aaron Donald in the middle, but we need to see some kind of more pass rush than none, I think, at all, which is kind of what we've seen for the most part so far, or too much more often than not. So I'll go with Nolan just from the standpoint, because I think it's possible that Jordan Davis is just fine, which is disappointing, but is also just like, okay, maybe he's just fine, and that's okay. Whereas if Nolan Smith's like not even playing on defense again in year 2 as a guy who was a first round pick last year, I mean, that's just like, it's like unacceptable. Like you can't have that as a first round pick. It's just not good. So I guess I'll go with Nolan.
That you're talking about Nolan Smith's stock and how he's rated just takes me back to personally one of my favorite yearly traditions was listening to you and RJ on the NFC mixtape argue about the definition of overrated and underrated. Right. It was my favorite thing. And may it rest in peace. But that's what came into my mind while I was listening. Jonny, any thoughts on the Jordan Davis pick, or shall we move on to records?
No, I feel like we've covered enough. I think BOG smashed it, which is basically at this point, if we don't see any pass rushing this year, I don't think we will. And I think if he doesn't do that at all, then you need to be like the most elite run defender basically on the planet to be considered like worthy of where they picked him. If you don't do anything from a pass rushing point of view. And we didn't see much in preseason, and BOG obviously watched him in training camp, but I haven't really read anything that seems to have changed my mind as of yet. So I'm in like wait and see mode. And I also think with Jordan Davis, even if he does it week 1 or week 2, it sort of doesn't mean much to me, because I need to see it week 13, week 14, week 15, because we know conditioning has been a problem in the past. So yeah, I'll leave it there with Jordan Davis.
All right, well, let's go to record predictions. And Jonny, since this is the topic that you really lobbied me to put in the podcast, I don't like to do record predictions, but Jonny was like, we have to do a record. Jonny, what's your record prediction for the Eagles this year?
I mean, for the first time, and this is really weird because I've been a sports fan like forever, and I don't think I've ever gone through the Eagles. Like, everyone just goes through the Eagles schedule and picks win-loss. I don't think I've ever done it until now. So seeing as I've done it, and now, of course, I can't find where I saved it on my computer because I thought I loaded it up. I didn't. So it's all going really well, but I promise I did do it.
No, you're
choking. So as I'm frantically trying to find where the hell I saved this stupid record prediction. Here we go.
Jonny is choking harder than a Matt Patricia defense in December.
I've got it. Shut up. I've got it. So I ended up going 12-5. I went back between 12-5 and 11-6, but I sort of changed it. So I won't bore you going by week, but I had the Eagles sadly losing this week because I think Green Bay a bit more sort of less new faces, should we say, than the Eagles with 2 offensive coordinators. I think first game of the season, there might be a little bit of growing pains for the Eagles. Then I had them splitting with Dallas and Washington. I just think Washington always seemed to play well against the Eagles. I was very boring and just said we'll beat them at home and lose to them away. Then I think the Eagles will sort of maybe struggle in that stretch where they go to at Dallas and then Washington, Los Angeles, Baltimore. So I had them winning sort of one of the Los Angeles and Baltimore games. I don't really care what one, but I had them losing at Baltimore and winning at LA. And then I did throw them, which is a bit depressing because I'm actually flying all the way across the world to watch the Eagles play in Cincinnati. But I feel like that could be a game that the Eagles will struggle with, just because I think if the Cincy offense is healthy, they're really, really good. So I sort of went... I guess I was in a range between 11 and 13, so I went safe and ended up falling on 12-5. I will have them as division winners. I'm definitely not going through the Cowboys record one by one ever, but I think the Eagles are a better team, so I will go with the Eagles 12-5 this year.
All right, BLG, what do you have for your record prediction / division place for the Eagles?
I'm sticking with what I did back in May when the schedule came out, and I did, my usual game-by-game prediction on bleedinggreennation.com, and I came down to 13-4, and that's obviously high, especially for a team that was really bad by the end of last year. But I think almost too much has been made of how bad they were from a standpoint of, I always hated in 2012 or at end of the 2011 season when the Eagles were like 4-8, I think. And then they finished the season strong 4-0 to get to 8-8. They just missed the playoffs. And everyone was like, well, this means good things for next season. Like, they're going to carry this positive momentum over. And I always hated that. So, that's not necessarily true. So to be fair, I feel like have to say, like, it's not just always the negative momentum will carry over as well. It could. I'm not saying it can't, but like, I'm not going to just merely assume it's definitely the case. Like, I think it gets talked about a lot. I just think there's a lot of things working in their favor. Jalen Hurts, again, coming off of his best training camp. You look at the Eagles' schedule, unlike last year where you had that gauntlet, and not only because of the opponents, but also because like the big rest disadvantage. They don't even play a team coming off their bye, I think, or Thursday night. The only like significant rest disadvantage I think they have this year is like that Saints game coming off a Monday Night Football into week 3 or whatever that is. Like, it's a relatively favorable schedule in terms of the things that matter with rest. And especially compared to last year. So I also look at the fact that there is no repeat winner in the NFC East. There has not been since 2004. Like, to assume the Cowboys are just going to do it again is like foolish to me. Eventually it'll happen, but I'm not going to assume that, especially when the Cowboys vibes aren't good. And speaking of vibes, I think things feel good with the Eagles. Like, coming out of training camp, I think that's something you can kind of generally measure. And by contrast, I think back, like, it's always clear in hindsight, but you look at like 2020 and Wentz doesn't have a good training camp. And I think Zach Ertz like wasn't happy with his contract. There's like a lot of different weird things just going on. And Doug Peterson seems burned out with not having enough power. Like, there's a lot of weird things going on. And I think the Eagles, although they have some weird things going on in the offseason, I guess earlier where Jalen Hurts didn't give the best endorsement to Nick Sirianni, I think the camp ended stronger than that what happened there. So I have them winning 13 games. I think the part that then gets confusing, to add the Negadelphia here, is they win one playoff game, they then lose the next playoff game, and it sets up like this unclear situation of what they should do moving forward. It's like some people will be like, no, we gotta have to keep Sirianni, you're on the right track, and other people will be like, no, he's the reason we lost the game and we're never going to get over the hump with him. So I think it's the most fitting result where they have this good season and they don't flame out in the playoffs, but they only get like one win, and then they don't quite reach that next level. And it creates pretty much the worst case scenario of like, there's no clear cut decision of what you should do with Sirianni.
All right. I am convinced that the same team will just never win the division back-to-back years. I mean, you cannot look at last year and explain the Eagles after week 12 having a 2-game lead with the tiebreaker over the Cowboys. So essentially a 2.5 game lead with 6 games left and winning one of their final 6 games and losing the division by a game. Like, I mean, Occam's razor, the simplest solution is the NFC East is cursed to never have a repeat winner. So I have the Eagles winning the division. It seems like it's never going to happen at this point that somebody wins it back to back. And that seems crazy considering only 2 teams in this division have been relevant in like the last 5 to 8 years. I can't remember when the last time Washington or the Giants were good was. I'd have to go check. But regardless, it seems crazy that they haven't had back-to-back winners. But I waffled back and forth between 11-6 and 12-5. And I ultimately settled on 12-5. So I have them going 12-5, winning the division. And, we'll see where the playoffs go from there. So that leaves us with our last question. It is our bold predictions. And I'm going to go first on this one. I don't want Johnny accusing me of there's a whole wide open world of predictions you could make. And just in case one of mine lines up, I don't want this to be, stolen from me. But I tried to come up with one that wasn't this, because this one could be disproved really early in the season. And it's best when you make a bold prediction if enough time elapses that everybody forgets about it except you. So you can either claim it or just, forget it ever happened. But my bold prediction is that the Eagles will start the year 0-2, back-to-back losses. Everybody's freaking out, and they will not lose a game again until the month of December. They're going to be 9-2 going into Baltimore in week 13, and I think that's the first game that they potentially lose since week 2 when they lose to the Atlanta Falcons on Monday Night Football after losing the opener to the Packers. So 0-2 to everybody freaking out to 9-2, clearly in command of the division with a great game against Baltimore in week 13. That is my bold prediction that could totally be disproven in like 3 days. But there you have it. Johnny definitely won't clip that if it happens. Johnny, what do you have for a bold prediction for us?
Yeah, I don't really know what bold essentially means. We're talking about this off air because I'm incredibly boring. I don't know if this counts as bold, but I'm going to say it anyway. I will go with the Eagles are the best offense in the NFL this year in terms of points scored per game.
That's bold. Yeah, that counts.
Is that bold? Oh, right, fair enough.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that does count. Yeah.
Awesome. Put it out there. I think, like, obviously there's 49ers, there's a few other teams that are out there with very, very good offenses as well. Chiefs, obviously Bengals, etc., etc. But I think the Eagles might have the best talent in the NFL on offense, and I think BLG hit something on the head that I've been so fed up of people talking about the end of last year. You make it seem like the Eagles were the worst offense the world has ever seen last year, and Jalen Hurts was like completing one pass a game. Like, they still ended up with pretty good numbers. They just had one obvious weakness, and it was so obvious that everyone in the world knows what it was. Every player knows what it was. They just couldn't handle zero pressure. Like, it was just like, it was so basically obvious to everyone in the world who watched the Eagles, including every single Eagles player. I cannot imagine that smart guys and bringing in their offensive coordinator and Jalen Hurts and Lane Johnson have not sat there over the offseason and thought, right, let's fix this one giant flaw. Because as weird as it sounds, if you take away their inability to basically play against the blitz last year, the offense was pretty fine. Like, it wasn't. The problem is, there's a lot of scheme guys online these days, and some of them are fantastic, but they do openly admit that, like, they love fancy schemes. And sometimes the Eagles scheme was boring. And I think a lot of scheme guys like don't have the Eagles as a top 10 offense this year. And I think it's because they just don't really like the scheme. But sometimes football's not as sort of interesting as it has to be, and it's just really good players can beat not so good players. And the Eagles might have an unbelievably good run blocking offensive line, one of the best pass blocking offensive lines, probably the best 1-2-3 punch at receiver, arguably a top 5 running back in the league. And I think Jalen Hurts is going to absolutely ball out this year. So I'm like, why could they not have the best offense in the league this year? So I will go bold prediction that, yeah, they will be the number one offense in terms of scoring. And I'm so glad that BLG mentioned the end of last year, because yes, they sucked, but they sucked at one very specific thing. They also then played a playoff game against the worst team in the world, led by the worst coach to face in Todd Bowles, because Todd Bowles is like, if you don't want to play against zero pressure, Todd Bowles is basically like the worst matchup ever the Eagles could have had. The Eagles could have weirdly played like some really passive defenses in the playoffs, ended up doing quite well on offense because they could still play. They just couldn't do one thing. And I don't really understand this stuff online where I don't see the Eagles as a top 10 offense from certain analysts. And I'm just like, I tweeted this the other day. I know I'm biased because I'm an Eagles fan, but I actually don't think I am an optimistic fan in general in my life. I think I'm quite a pessimist. So, like, my teams necessarily over the last, 15 years of watching high-level sports, the Eagles have won the Super Bowl once. My English football team, Arsenal, have not won a lot the past 15 years. Like, I'm not an optimist. And I find it really hard to see, teams being ranked above the Eagles. And I look at their talent and I'm like, they are nowhere near the Eagles' level of talent. So I will go for the Eagles being the number one scoring offense in the NFL this year. And I will leave it to BLG to end with his bold prediction. Sorry, Shane, you're going to interrupt.
Yeah, I will say I've been doing my stat preview posts, and since it's week 1 and we don't have stats from this year, I just looked at weeks 12 through 18 of last year, which again, the Eagles went 2-5. Their offense ranked 7th in drop back EPA, 7th in rushing EPA, 10th in drop back success rate, 5th in rushing success rate, and Jalen Hurts ranked 9th among quarterbacks in EPA per play. So the Eagles offense, there was a major problem last year with the Eagles, the defense, and also zero pressure. But the offense was still quite good throughout the year. I'm on board. I co-sign your take here. And we'll throw it over to BLG now. For BLG, give us your bold prediction. I promise that we won't tweet it out unless it comes true. What do you have for us?
I do want to honorable mention bold prediction because I have the Eagles losing in week 1 too, which I think has really bothered some people from what I've seen. It's because I think it even when I tweeted out that my schedule prediction back in May, I got some flack for that. They're like, "How could you have us losing?" And I'm like, I had them going 13-4. I'm not saying they're even going to be bad. I just think the Packers are a lot better than a lot of people.
Always negative, BLG. Always negative.
Okay, they lose week 1, the season is over. Of course, it does usually feel that way if that actually comes to fruition. But I'm saying I don't think that's the case, clearly, even if they do. I just think I had the Packers second in my power rankings that I did for BGN today. I just think the Packers are a really good team. Anyway, although I will say the last thing on this, It is bold of Shane to say they're going to lose to Kirk Cousins in prime time, because that is, not his forte typically, but that's what makes it a bold prediction. You guys went positive for sure, at least more than I'm going to go here. We talked about Saquon a little bit. Johnny had him as your MVP?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
Are you going to do a Saquon bar prediction as well then? Then we can just double down.
Yeah, but it's not going to be a positive one. It's not going to be, it's not super negative. I just think I'm lower on Saquon than consensus, and part of that's just because, Shane, you mentioned the NFC East mixtape and the overrated players that we've done over the years, and I've often had Saquon as my most overrated player, not because he's terrible, he can't play at all, he can't be good. According to Nick Sirianni, he had a great run in practice on Monday, so take that for what it's worth.
Took his sunglasses off.
Yeah, a non-contact practice. He had a great run. Nice to see. I just think the idea of Saquon is better than the reality of Saquon when you factor in Penn State guy, number 2 overall pick, fantasy football guy, only good player on a bad Giants team. I just think there's a lot more shine on him than the reality meets. I think he'll be fine. But in that vein, I don't think my bold prediction is that Saquon Barkley will not have more yards from scrimmage than DeAndre Swift had for the Eagles last year. And I think that comes down to there's injury concern of Saquon. I think that comes down to there are still a lot of other mouths to feed in this offense. I think he is going to be the top running back, but Kenny Gainwell was still getting decent amount of first team work in training camp. And Will Shipley even has been mixing in there. So that's still something. It's not nothing. The Eagles have had weird running back usage dating back to last year, as we know, with Kenny Gainwell getting the lion's share of work in week 1 over DeAndre Swift for really no good reason. I don't think that situation is going to happen quite again. But to stick with Gainwell for a moment, who was a player I've not been high on, in part because of how the Eagles overutilize him, I think, relative to what his role should be. Kenny Gainwell had a really good last practice of training camp. I'm not saying that means he's going to have an awesome year, but the point I want to make highlighting that is that Saquon did not have that moment this summer or in the spring. And that doesn't mean everything. Running backs, it can be harder for them to stand out in, non-contact practices, again, unless you're Nick Sirianni on Monday. But I was always waiting for that Saquon moment. And outside of a really nice wheel route touchdown that he had against the Patriots in that practice, which was great. And that was really the only time I thought he really flashed. And I'm not saying he's cooked, but I don't know that he's going to be this revolutionary player that kind of the conceptual idea of him is. So I think he's just going to be more fine than a revelation or amazing. And I think, not to make him the disappointing player, but I think if he does not have more yards than DeAndre Swift from scrimmage, which is my prediction, that'd be pretty disappointing for what you're paid, what you paid for Saquon, top of the market running back money. So that's my bold prediction.
All right. Well, there you have it, everyone. Our season preview with BLG. You guys be sure you go back and listen to this episode and clip out everything Jonny was wrong about, everything I was right about. Tag us in Twitter throughout the season. It'll be a good time. BLG, thanks for joining us again. We'll always love getting you on the podcast. Before we get out of here, anything you got coming out that you want to plug? Plug your stuff, man. The floor is yours.
Yeah, just check out bleedinggreennation.com. You may have heard of it. Jonny has some good all-22 film breakdowns that will be coming, obviously, after the game. I also believe he has some stats to look out for this Eagles-Packers Week 1 matchup that'll be relevant to this game. Also, my work there, available at bleedinggreennation.com. Also, check me out, as you said earlier, on Twitter and Instagram. That's just my first and last name, at Brandon Gowton. And that's just about it. I think anything else to come will, stay tuned to those. And then hopefully there's, more news, if there is any, to be announced on those platforms.
Yeah, we're hoping to hear announcements on that soon. Jonny, any final thoughts, anything you want to plug? Do you got another concept of the week article you're going to put out? Because I love personally that people are tagging us every time they see Dart happen in a game now. It's great.
Yeah, it might just become run game of the week. I think it's definitely going to start with run game of the week. Not really. Just looking forward to getting into it, I guess. I'll be doing the usual for Bleeding Green this year. So the offensive all 22 piece, the defensive all 22 piece. I think it's probably going to be the most difficult year to do because the last couple of years have been quite easy-ish because the scheme has been quite stagnant. Whereas this year, we're going to have to watch a little bit more closely, because I think I don't really know what to expect. So nothing major to plug, just the usual, really. And get on the Patreon, as I'm sure Shane would plug as well. But if you can support us over there, please do. And hopefully we'll get some more comments on the Discord as we go throughout the year as well, because Twitter is quite difficult to see notifications as well. So if you do have any like really specific questions or things you want to ask us during the week, it is a lot easier for me personally to check the Discord as well than it is with Twitter, because it is a slight minefield with lots of weird things there as we currently stand. So yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us. As Jonny mentioned, if you want to support the show on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/ontheshanepage. We have a $3 and a $5 a month tier, and you get some exclusive perks like access to a Discord that Jonny mentioned where you can chat with us a little better than on Twitter. You also get an ad-free podcast feed. You get some creative control for our film reviews. We'll be posting a Player of the Week spotlight poll each week that we'll give special attention to in our film review, as well as some other things. So go check that out if you want to and are able. BLG, thanks for coming on the show. Always great to have you on. You guys keep it tuned here to the Eagles Pinpool Network. We got a lot of shows to cram into this week before a Friday night game. Again, it's really weird not starting on a Sunday, but all the shows are going to come out. You'll get like 6 shows in your feed between today and Friday. So be sure you're subscribed there. 5-star rating and reviews are greatly appreciated. And we will catch you guys next week. We will be back in the film. We can finally say our intro without giving the caveats, doing in-depth film breakdowns. That starts next week, hopefully with an Eagles victory over the Packers. We'll catch you guys then.